my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and it is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And man, we gonna touch on the election again. There's new data coming out because we Latinos have been taking some fucking heat, okay, in this last election about how we voted. There's been some new data coming out that maybe our tias and tios weren't as trash, or specifically our tios weren't as trash as we thought they were. But we shall see as we dive into a bit of the data here. We're also going to talk about Los Angeles putting on some new, I guess, protections to keep it a sanctuary city, I guess in preparation of Donald Trump and the mass deportations that he has promised. So we will touch on that. And then on some positive news, if you will, I guess positive as it can be. I've talked a lot about Puerto Rico here and the electrical grid and the company Luma, who is responsible for managing the electrical grid over there. There is some has been a ruling, I guess I would say, that has been put in place where they actually can be held accountable for lackluster service. So hopefully the people of Puerto Rico will be getting the service that they deserve. So we'll talk about that in our Mi Gente segment. But first, let's start with the nonsense, the BS, in a segment we call For the People in the Back.
Say it louder for the people in the Say it louder for the people in the back.
All right, so let's start with these elections, right? We have been taking the brunt, we as Latinos, of how Trump got in office, and rightfully so to a degree. But there are some new polls and stats and data coming out, data. For some reason, like certain words, you realize like, have I been pronouncing these things wrong my entire life? Data, whatever it is. Anyway, has come out. So new information has been released. So We Are Me Too did an article, and I'm pulling from that. Headline is Latino voters didn't vote the way everyone assumed. New poll drops some mind-blowing insights. Now, in the article, they say one of the biggest stories of the 2024 presidential election was the vast and significant shift in Latino voters for President-elect Trump. While the candidate did make inroads with the Latino electorate, the story is now different with the release of a new poll from the American electorate poll of Hispanic voters, powered by Unidos US. According to the poll, Latino voters cast their ballots decisively for Vice President Harris. Latino voters didn't swing as drastically to President-elect Donald Trump as first reported. Now, again, that's why you got to be careful with these knee-jerk reactions that come out when there's a historical event like this presidential election. Now, they say while Latino men did swing more towards President-elect Trump, the numbers are less dramatic than initially reported in exit polls. This is still a big jump, but the American electorate poll of Hispanic voters shows that Latino men voted for President Harris at 56%, as opposed to the 53% reported earlier, and voted for President-elect Trump at 43%. All right, so 3% difference. Not, I would say, as drastic as they promoted it to be, but, I'll take a win's a win here. They also go on to say there are still a lot of votes left to be counted in states with large Latino populations like California, so that number could continue to change. First of all, time out for a second. The fact that here in the United States of America, we are closing in on a month after the election, we're still counting votes is fucking crazy. It really shows you how behind and, slow, obviously, but just non-efficient our voting process really is. Anyway, They go on to say, additionally, Latino women voted for Vice President Harris at 66%, while 32% voted for President-elect Trump. Unidos US, the largest nonpartisan organization representing Latino people, helped to create the new polling information that is changing the view of the Latino vote. The data provides insight into how Latino voters voted in 8 states with large Latino populations: Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, and California. In the crucial swing state of Pennsylvania, for example, Latino men voted 63% for Vice President Harris and 35% for President-elect Trump. Meanwhile, Senator Bob Casey, who is running for re-election, got 65% of Latino men's votes and performed better than Vice President Harris. Okay. I mean, I guess I feel slightly better. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we don't got to throw away our, every dude, every Latin male, I guess we could say. I mean, this is I guess good information to have when your coworkers comes at you or something like that. Because people love to point the finger. But I think I've been having like a bigger existential, not crisis, but conversation with myself about how this happened. And I think as I've kind of like, I think I talked about this. I was like kind of numb to it all for a while and just kind of compartmentalized this whole event, if you will. And as I've been out and about a little bit more, as I've been sort of processing, I guess, all of this a little bit more and really just talking to people, I think what's become clear to me, and I don't know if this provides any comfort for anybody, but I think it, at least you can make sense of it. I think Donald Trump is a symptom, and I think that's what we sort of have to recognize. He's a piece of shit. He is horrible for democracy and everything we've ever felt, but he represents an issue, right? Like, in order for somebody like Donald Trump to be able to run the campaign he did, to be this popular, I mean, again, he won the popular vote, which means the majority of the country voted for him, not just like the key states needed to win as he had in the past, but now down to like individual people and numbers, majority voted for Donald Trump and supported him, right? And I think it's short-sighted of us to just call everybody stupid, to call everybody racist, to call everybody a misogynist, and I think there's elements of all of that, within the reasoning for for what happened in this election and for how things turned out. But I think the sort of larger conversation has to be, how do we get to a place where somebody like Donald Trump could run a successful campaign against somebody like Kamala Harris, who is, regardless of what the propaganda wants to tell us, very much so qualified to hold that position far more than him, right? And particularly with the type of campaign he has run and continued to run in this election. How does that happen? And I really believe the bigger conversation here is a complete and utter failure of our politicians on both sides of the aisle to meet the needs of the everyday person, and Democrats included. And I think that's why I critique Biden so heavily, and I even critique the campaign to a degree that Kamala and them ran. And I had mentioned this in I think a previous episode, the one before it, but they're trying to tell us that there's record numbers in the GDP and, all-time lows for things like unemployment and blah, blah, blah. And while all that could be true on paper, it's only serving certain people, because you can tell us that it's great, but the eye test for the everyday person, boots on the ground, tells a different story. And I think it's the denial and the just blindness to the plight of the everyday person that really created a perfect storm for why people felt so disenfranchised that they just feel the need to vote for the complete opposite of what's going on, just in hopes that it will shake some shit up and make things better. And that's what it, if that's really what happened here. You have Biden and all these guys telling you how great things are and the American economy is strong and all this, but the everyday person is not feeling that. You could say unemployment is incredibly low and record numbers of jobs and things like that, but most jobs are paying shit money. Most jobs are not paying people what they need to actually be able to survive, let alone live relatively comfortable lives, as they should while having a full-time job. And that's where the issue really lies right there. And a lot of it comes from how expensive it is to run a campaign, right? And the fact that these corporations are so powerful because these candidates need them in order to run their campaigns. So the politicians are not calling out these corporations the way they should, calling them out for price gouging, calling them out for the fact that their CEOs are the wage gap between employee to CEO is astronomical and only growing. Right? Those are the core issues there. Because what we see in companies and I saw it firsthand this week for whatever reason I found myself like just interacting with people a little bit more, and I was just out and about and touching base with people I haven't seen in a while, and just I guess through that you get sort of a feel of what's really happening and what people are feeling, right? And for me, you recognize that like people are frustrated, and I've been frustrated for a long time, but I think it's come to a real tipping point, and that's what creates the perfect storm of somebody like a Donald Trump, right? And you watch as like, corporate American companies are having layoffs and all these things right now too. And the irony of it is these layoffs are happening, and you're paying people shit wages as is, and you're making people do the job of 5 people while not giving them raises and no bonuses anymore as there was in times past. But the CEOs are still making their bottom end. The board, the investors, it's never coming out of their pocket, right? The first to have to suffer is always going to be the everyday person. So while the CEO is still making an exorbitant salary, they're laying off the everyday person, right? They're not taking a pay cut, or at least a real one, right? They're not willing to say, you know what? I'm making too much money. Let me take this pay cut so we can keep whatever 100 employees on staff and not have to lay these people off. Of course not. And that's the issue right there, right? And then on top of that, corporate greed, where you have this disaster capitalism, right? They post things like COVID and and then inflation. You have all these things that companies are able to blame, higher prices on. And maybe at one point it was true, but then what they realized, was, okay, well, if we can get people used to paying this much money for eggs and milk, we don't really need to drop the price, even though inflation or COVID aren't a thing anymore. And that's what we saw. And unfortunately, the powers that be, the people in charge, are not concerned enough about that, not paying attention, or they're a part of the elite class themselves. Even though the Democratic Party is supposed to be the party of the everyday person, many of them live elite lifestyles. They went to elite colleges. They have elite job titles like lawyer, doctor, entrepreneur, business owner, hedge fund manager. They're not living the everyday person's life. They don't know what the fuck it's like. So they're not aware, or they're blissfully ignorant, or they choose to ignore it, whatever it might be. The way that we are nickel and dime as people every single day when we leave the fucking house. And they're not doing enough, or they're not running on platforms that are built upon affecting in a positive way the everyday lives of the everyday person. And not calling out the corporate bullshit as they should. And I think that's the greater issue. That's the perfect storm that then allows somebody like Donald Trump to get into office, right? Look at the gas prices that we talked about, that were happening a few years ago, the crazy gas prices. Meanwhile, after that, these large gas companies are reporting record numbers, like record first quarters and things like that, because they were gouging the shit out of the everyday person and blaming the high gas prices on something else, something fictitious. You can't have record profits while also claiming you're in a dire circumstance because you're having trouble getting gas. That's why you're raising the prices. If that was the case, you would be basically breaking even to where you were before. If the argument is, let's say, that gas was harder to get, resources were limited in certain countries, blah, 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 and therefore they were charging you more money to get gas over here, you're raising the price to get you to where your normal profit margins are, right? And that's what they claim to be doing. But the reality is they reported record numbers for profits, meaning they actually raised the gas price beyond what it needed to, and it actually resulted in them having a better quarter for them and their investors at the expense of the everyday person paying $5-something a gallon for gas and questioning whether or not they had enough money to have gas in their car to get to work. That's disgusting. The airlines, right, when there was the hurricanes happening in Florida recently and other states, they were gouging their customers. Flights were like $1,000 from Florida to some other place purposely because they knew people were trying to get out of Florida. That's absolutely disgusting. The government should be stepping in. The fact that we pay the baggage fees that we do. I got charged $50 at JetBlue to check a fucking bag? For me to put a bag under the plane? And you get charged to have a fucking carry-on when there's already carry-on bins in there? It's like... And then the service is getting worse. And I sound like an old man... But it's like, we should all be fucking pissed off and like way more angry about this. We're getting nickel and dime while not only getting nickel and dime unnecessarily, but on top of it, they're providing us with less and less of a service. And the quality of things is becoming less and less while we pay more and more money for it. The government and our powers that be, the politicians, are supposed to be the guardrails that protect us from this shit. And they're not doing their job. So yeah, I get it. I get why people are angry. And I even was thinking about this. I'll end on this note. The idea of like morality, right? And I think the Democrats ran a campaign thinking that majority of people valued being a good person, a good moral person over their economics, essentially, right? And what we saw was, on people's list of priorities, I think everybody wants to be considered a good person, but also people are going to look out for numero uno at the end of the day. And to a degree, I get it. Now, for me, and listen, this has been much to my detriment. I probably could be a wealthy man right now if I didn't have the moral compass that I do. But for me, being a good person has always been, top of the food chain, above becoming wealthy, above, having in excess of money. I want to do it the quote unquote right way. I want to be good to people. I don't want to mistreat people. I don't want to cheat, lie, steal, or take advantage of others. I want, equality. I want people to be treated well. And I would vote for those moral stances above, maybe my own financial gain. But also, I kind of get other people saying, listen, I can't do that. And I think that's where we sort of went wrong. That's like the bigger existential conversation. You're not meeting the realistic, real-world needs of people. You have failed the everyday person. And you can feel it. I guess I have my own bubble here. I hang out in my studio. I do my work. And, when I leave the house, generally speaking, it's for work. But, I was just like walking around New York the other day and was in, the office that we have in the building. I popped in there, and but even just like I felt it on the street. It was just like a different vibe. It just felt like I still love New York. New York is still New York, but it still just felt off to me. Like in my heart, in my gut, in my bones, I felt it. I was like, man, people are hurting. Like people like something is off. I drove by like you know, a couple like of my favorite bars that we used to hang out at our old building, and they're closed down. And not even like, oh, they got like bought out, replaced by something else. No, just done. And these were places that were busy, that like always had a crowd there and like quality food and, you know, whatever, like, but gone, laying vacant. And even as a DJ, places that you could count on, like clubs that like it never missed, are missing a lot more now. And I'm not even, and not to say like, you know, oh, nothing, but like you feel it. Like I'm not trying to be dire. People are still going out. People are still having fun. People are still doing things, but it feels slightly off. Like people are a little bit more hesitant to go out and do something. They're, you know, looking for ways to save, and again I get it. I'm just like going off of my own like train, like the conversation I have with myself in the car. I'm just talking to myself about the world and life. But if you're looking for like reasoning as to how this happened, I do think the conversation is bigger than racism, misogyny, homophobia. Again, I think 100% that it exists, and I think it prominently exists in certain spaces, and it very much is a particular factor. But I also think what truly swayed this election is a real frustration, and beyond frustration, I think a desperation, where people just don't know what the fuck the answer is. And all they know is, I'm suffering, I'm hurting, I just want the opposite of whatever's currently in there. And I think when people are suffering and when they're desperate, as we've all been in certain positions, we're not thinking logically, we're thinking far more emotionally. Because obviously someone like Donald Trump doesn't give a fuck about the everyday person. I still believe Democrats care more. They don't care enough, but they care more. And I think Donald Trump is going to be worse for us than Kamala Harris would have been, just by some of the picks he's been making here. It's about him, not us, right? And that's the issue. And I think both of them are like that to a degree, but obviously he's even worse. But I think people reacting off of raw emotion, of suffering, of frustration, of busting their ass and not having enough, right? Having a full-time job, doing all they're supposed to do, but still living in a place of survival mode. I understand that frustration leads to desperation, leads you to make impulsive and what some might deem to be dumb decisions. And I think that's what we saw that tipped Donald Trump over the scale here over Kamala Harris. She didn't do enough to speak to us and to explain or admit failures of the Biden administration and how she's going to be drastically different. And again, I think a lot of people are able to look past the idea of morality, because I had people I spoke to, you know, he didn't tell me this in these words, but a black friend of mine I was having a conversation with this week that I hadn't seen in a while, and he was saying the same thing. I think Donald Trump's a piece of shit. I think he's an asshole. But what's going on right now hasn't been working, isn't working. So it's this desperation of like, all right, anything but then what we have right now. Let's fucking try it, because this isn't working. And I think that's a lot of the reasoning. And I don't know if it brings you some peace. I had this conversation with my dad yesterday. I felt like it brought him a little bit of peace, as far as like being able to wrap his head around it all, you know. And I don't think it's as like, again, there's a large sector where there's a lot of hate, a lot of fear mongering. But I do think I do think the tipping point, like the votes that Biden had last time around that Kamala didn't get, I do think that was based upon desperation and just frustration. Or frustration turned to desperation. I don't know. That brought me a little bit of peace that maybe, at least I can logically make sense of it all. And it doesn't feel as targeted of a result, if you will. Like, it makes sense to me. I get it. I don't agree with it, but I get it. I don't know. Hopefully that brings some peace to somebody. Anyway, we will quickly touch on some measures being placed in preparation of Donald Trump's presidency by the city of Los Angeles to protect its sanctuary status. So we'll talk about that, but we'll take a quick break here, and then we'll be right back. All right, we are back, and let's talk about Los Angeles real quick. Pulled this from We Are Me Too. They say Los Angeles goes full sanctuary city to protect its people. The Los Angeles City Council has officially designated Los Angeles as a sanctuary city. This comes as a direct response to President-elect Donald Trump's promise of mass deportations once he returns to the White House in January. The ordinance, approved on Tuesday with a unanimous 13-0 vote, bars city resources from being used to support federal immigration enforcement. This includes prohibiting city employees from cooperating with immigration and customs enforcement agents, ICE, or sharing data on undocumented individuals. Councilmember Hugo Soto Martinez made the city's stance clear, quote, "We're going to send a very clear message that the city of Los Angeles will not cooperate with ICE in any way." He added that the law aims to ensure residents feel protected and supported by their local government. Now, despite the new law, federal authorities still have the power to carry out deportations in LA. The city's ordinance acts more as a symbolic shield for its large immigrant population. Quote, "We are hardening our defenses," said Councilmember Bob Bloomfield. Now, they say the impact of sanctuary city policies on Los Angeles. Los Angeles has been known for its resistance to federal immigration crackdown. The new law enshrines policies that have been in place for decades. The Los Angeles Police Department, for example, has prohibited officers from inquiring about immigration status since 1979. Councilmember Eunices Hernandez emphasized the importance of making these protections permanent. Quote, "It's going to be enshrined permanently, and that's important," she said, "because it means it can't just change from one administration to another without a significant amount of work." Now, the ordinance also builds on California's statewide protections. In 2017, the state declared itself a sanctuary state, limiting local law enforcement's involvement in federal immigration activities. However, critics argue that these measures ignore voter concerns. Ira Methlam, the spokesman for the Federation for American Immigration Reform, claimed that the council is, quote, "ignoring a very clear message from the voters by continuing to resist federal immigration policies." This is an interesting conversation. I mean, this is great as far as, Los Angeles protecting the people that really make up a large part of the DNA of the city of Los Angeles and California as a whole. It's Latin population, it's immigrant population, and I think showcasing that locally it is a safe space for immigrants. That last point, though, they're sort of commenting on it all kind of comes back to the election, but even the way that Democrats sort of flipped their stance on immigration to a degree, being a bit harsher. And I don't even say that because Obama deported a lot of people. I think their public stance to immigration being a bit harsher is what I should say. I think behind closed doors, it's kind of been pretty consistent. But you have a large sector of the U.S. population, regardless of what Republican and Democrat, who are, wanting, stricter immigration laws and I think truthfully, I think we are at a place where there has to be a better system. I think it's a failure of the system, because I genuinely, so you are seeing a strain being placed on certain cities, and certain systems, right? Because of a large influx of people coming here, and that's not me having a harsh stance on immigration. I think there's a reality when you have a large amount of unplanned people coming into a particular area. It's going to place a strain on resources. I mean, again, being from New York, I see it. Certain areas, and I'm not even like a fear mongering way. I don't feel fucking scared to be in New York. That's like this narrative that is put around. But you just see like a large number of people who have no place to go, right? And I don't remember it being like that just a few years ago, right? I think there was far more of a, it just didn't exist like that, right? So it's a noticeable difference. I think the one thing that is the separation between, I guess, what Donald Trump says and anybody else is like, you have to humanely enforce the law and give people basic human rights and not treat them like animals. And at the same time, if we are somehow, some way able to create systems that allow for Ukrainian refugees to come here with open arms, why are we not creating the same sort of systems and allowances for brown people to come here, right? And that's, I think, where the discrepancy lies, and I think that's where there's a failure of the nuance of this whole conversation, right? Is that when it's a brown immigrant, a black or brown immigrant, their humanity is taken into account far less, and that's where the problem is, right? And I think that's where much of the anger and frustration lies, but I think it's a balancing act. I think you got to figure out ways that we can still be the United States of America, and be a place that welcomes those, who are escaping dire circumstances. We've always been that. A country whose economy and foundation has been built by immigrants, and immigrants being such a huge positive contributors to our economy and our country as a whole. I think we can continue to sort of embrace that while figuring out ways to create a better system that leads to less overwhelm of the cities that end up getting an influx of immigrants, and I think that's sort of the conversation that needs to be had, and I think that's sort of what's missing in a lot of these conversations, right? Because I think it's like, it's either people are like, we have to just let everybody in, and I think that's kind of unrealistic, or other people are like, they're stealing our jobs and they're murdering and killing people. It's like there's no, like I always say this, the truth is somewhere in the fucking middle. People run to either the most extreme and illogical versions of things. Yes, we are a country built on immigrants. It's a beautiful thing. But also, yes, we have to have the proper systems in place to make sure there are resources to not have our quality of life affected negatively by immigration as well, and to make sure that these people are treated properly as human beings, as they should be. And I think that is, the nuanced conversation, and I think on either side, people are scared to have that conversation or don't want to because, they're so ingrained in just being right in their own beliefs. And I think that is the bigger conversation. I think that's probably what people are calling for more than anything. I think people who have maybe been swayed or are like kind of like, looking at immigration a bit more harshly, they just want a better system in place that is helpful for everybody, both those who are looking for a better life and those who are already here, and already participating in the system. So I think that's the larger conversation. I don't even know how we got on this tangent. I just, people are, again, the last thing I was saying, people are just afraid of having the hard conversation. It's easier to be fucking Donald Trump saying we're just going to deport everybody, or it's easier to be like everybody's racist if they have any issue with with mass immigration. It's like you could have somewhere in the middle where you say let's just do this the right way. What's the most efficient, humane possible way that we can still continue the fabric of this country, that is built on immigrants, but do it in a way that doesn't put a strain on a system or doesn't make our systems completely fail, in general. And I think that's the harder conversation, the harder thing to figure out. And again, unfortunately, we always take the fucking easy way out instead of sitting down and just trying to be intelligent human beings. At the end of the day, I don't just my own fucking tangents I'm going off on. But yeah, that's that. We'll talk about some positivity now. We'll move on to some positivity coming out of Puerto Rico. All right, so you've heard me talk about this a bunch. I know it's been big headlines. Puerto Rico and the ongoing problem with their energy and electricity and rolling blackouts and the subpar service, even though they're paying even more money for electricity than they ever have. I mean, again, similar things we were talking about in the States. You're being gouged. Meanwhile, they're providing you a shitty service on top of it. So Luma is actually the company. Luma Energy is the one that is in charge of managing the grid and providing the service here on a day-to-day basis for Puerto Rico. And now we have some news coming out from the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau where they're actually saying now that they are going to start fining Luma for non-compliance. And this is huge because a lot of people, myself included, I've been talking about this for a while. I'm saying, where is the fucking accountability at the end of the day, right? How do you have these companies and nobody is holding them accountable if they're not providing the proper service? How does massive blackouts on a regular basis happen and nobody's being held accountable for it? Well, now, and by the way, this is what's frustrating about government is how fucking slow it moves. Because it should have been done years ago, but here we are. And now there's measures being put in place, and the hope is that if they find Luma, hit them where it hurts, as I always say, the pockets, that it will force them to actually start doing their job, which is I laugh because it's so fucking sad that that's the point you have to come to. But anyway, summary kind of what's going on here. Now, Luma Energy, which manages Puerto Rico's power transmission and distribution system, could face fines for not meeting established performance standards after 3 years of regulatory monitoring. This is the first step in holding them accountable under their supplementary contract. Now, they're saying the Puerto Rico's Energy Bureau will compare Luma's performance against PREPA's baseline standards from before they went into bankruptcy. So, for anybody not familiar, PREPA is actually the government agency that actually still owns the grid, but they went bankrupt, and that's why they had to outsource the management of the electricity in Puerto Rico to Luma. So now, what the and this is what the complaint is. I'm trying to break it down concisely for anybody who's not super familiar. Complaint of people on the island is they pay more for electricity than they did pre-Luma, and the service is worse than it was pre-Luma. So now they are going to be monitoring and saying your standard is you have to at least meet the standard of PREPA before they were going into bankruptcy. So people's electricity can't be their electricity can't be any worse. The quality of their service can't be any worse than it was before Luma came into the picture. And if it is, you're going to be fined accordingly. Beautiful, right? At least we can get back to where we were a few years ago, before Luma took over, before the service got even worse, and before blackouts were a regular thing. And because I know a lot of people be like, oh, the electrical grid in Puerto Rico was a problem before Hurricane Maria. Sure, but I've been going to Puerto Rico since I was a tiny little kid. I was in kindergarten probably the first time I went, maybe even earlier. I've never can remember blackouts ever being a thing or a concern, something we were worried about. That's only been in the last few years. So, spare me. Now, the other thing that is incredibly fucking frustrating here is the power grid needs to be repaired. You know what the irony is? The money is there. There are federal reconstruction funds that have been set aside. And the morons of Luma have not processed them in a timely or efficient fashion so that the money can be given to PREPA, who, like I said, is the government the government agency that owns the grids, so that PREPA can do the construction necessary to repair the grid. And this is where government fucking red tape comes into play. This is a perfect example, and it's confusing, and I apologize if this is hard to follow. It's hard to follow even as I'm reading it and trying to understand it. The process for getting federal funds between Luma and PREPA for the island to fix the grid, that whole process is actually managed by a company called IEM, an outside company, who already has multiple reconstruction-related contracts in Puerto Rico. And it raises questions as to efficiency and accountability. You think? You have 3 different fucking companies doing the job of what should be one person. So they're just fucking going around in circles. It should be one company who's handling all this. But instead, you have to go through this company who Luma manages it day to day, but PREPA actually owns the grid. But then you have this third company who's actually the ones responsible for managing the process of getting federal funds. So it's this whole 3-way fucking circle jerk of people trying to figure out who to talk to. Obviously, it's going to be incredibly inefficient. But that's the federal government for you. The federal government is not run like an efficient business. It's all types of fucking stupid red tape and bureaucracy and unnecessary steps that complicate the process and make it so fucking slow to move on anything. So to recap here. If you needed another reason to hate Luma, understand. Even before that, to recap here. If you're tired of Luma getting away with murder and taking advantage of the everyday person, maybe there's some good news here, as the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau has said they will begin to fine Luma if they're not meeting certain standards of operation and certain standards of service for the people of Puerto Rico. Meaning, if your service is not as good as it was when PREPA was in power, pre-bankruptcy, Luma is going to get fined. And again, I know Puerto Rico has always had electrical grid issues or a grid that needed replacing pre-Hurricane Maria, but it's gotten worse under Luma. And blackouts have become a thing under Luma. When it was PREPA, they had their issues, but you can count on the service far more than you can with Luma. So now, the Energy Bureau is saying you have to at least be as good as the previous people that were in charge, or we're going to fine you. Now, if you needed another reason to hate Luma, understand that federal funds are available for reconstruction efforts related to Puerto Rico's power infrastructure. But PREPA, who owns the grid still, can't make those repairs and can't get reimbursed for what they've already done because Luma is taking their sweet ass time and not promptly seeking reimbursement for these funds. They're delaying getting the money that is allocated to help the people of Puerto Rico in terms of their electrical grid. Federal funds that are there for the taking. Luma, because of their incompetence, is not moving quickly or efficiently enough to get that money placed in the right hands so that it can better the lives of the people of Puerto Rico. Now, the Energy Bureau is saying, if you're not providing a good quality of service to the people of Puerto Rico, if you are still delaying doing the work needed to get the federal funds released to make the repairs needed to the electrical grid, we are going to begin to fine you. And this is what I've been saying. Hit them where it hurts. You want them to do something? Start taking money out of their pocket, and you'll see how quickly they will begin to react to that. Finally, some potential accountability by the powers that be here in Puerto Rico to hold Luma up and demand that they provide the people of Puerto Rico with a service that they can count on, and one that is worth the absurd amount of money that they are charging the people of Puerto Rico. Now, I don't want to get too excited about this because, the government loves to disappoint. But this is a great step in the right direction of saying, we are going to hold you accountable, and we are not going to just allow you to blindly take from the people of Puerto Rico without giving them something in return. Let's see what happens going from here. And by the way, as far as people are like, oh, why don't we cancel Luma's contract? Apparently, Luma's contract can only be canceled for breaches over 3 consecutive years. So whatever the fuck that means. But then they say, but this timeline resets with any interruptions. So it's fucking complicated. But at least here, them getting fined, potentially hitting them where it hurts, could make them be accountable to at least provide the bare minimum service. It's a sad world we live in. That's the positive news for today. Anyway, that's our view at this segment. Let's tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
All right, I'm hoping as we go into the Thanksgiving week, I am hoping that the conversation I had around the election and politics, maybe it diffuses a little bit of the hostility you might have had towards your Trump-loving Theo, right? It doesn't feel as personal. I think that's where the relief I feel is. People are just fucking hurting. And yes, their desperation makes them act stupid, but they're just hurting. And that's that. I could deal with that more than I could deal with them being racist, misogynist, or homophobic. And some people still are, but it gives me a little bit of hope. A little bit of hope here. And that's all I have to say on that. As far as immigration and the sanctuary cities, I mean, I think it's great for Los Angeles, which very much so is this sort of beautiful cultural melting pot that has had a large contribution by the immigrant population, specifically many people from Mexico, helping make LA the awesome city that it is. Great to see them doing their part to continue to make it a safe space for immigrants, and their families, for brown people. It still, again, doesn't protect across the board with the craziness of potentially Donald Trump. We'll have to wait and see with that. But I think it's nice to see politicians standing with the people who make them who they are. And again, that's what the Democrats have done a terrible job at now on a national level, which is why we are going to be welcoming in President-elect Donald Trump in January. On the positive side of things, again, these are the guardrails I speak of, what your government is supposed to do. The Energy Bureau in Puerto Rico saying, we're going to fine Luma if they do not meet our standards of service anymore. That's what you need. You hit these companies in their pockets. They don't want to give up money for no reason. If they're going to be fined, then they're going to actually have to start doing their work so they can avoid these fines. That's what it comes down to. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. I don't want to get ahead of myself. And that's that. Everybody have a beautiful Thanksgiving. I'm not going to do any shows next week with the just condensed week that it is. Too much of a clusterfuck. I'm going to enjoy having a little bit of a slower week. Especially, I DJ Thanksgiving Eve now too. So it's just a lot going on. So I won't talk to y'all next week, but, bite your lip. Don't get into argument about politics. Eat some good food. Be safe. Enjoy some time off. And yeah, that's all we can ask for, right? Have an amazing Thanksgiving week if you're celebrating. And I'll be back the following week, last week of November, which is crazy. And we'll talk then. Until then, be safe, maintain your sanity, and we'll talk soon. Peace.